In the early morning of April 17th, 2010, a fire broke out at the Ichimi Iwase family home in Toyokawa City, Aichi Prefecture, Japan. The incident was discovered by a neighboring woman who woke up at 2:10 a.m. due to bright light shining through her window. Looking outside, she was shocked to see large flames erupting from the Iwase family home. At that time, there were 7 people in the neighboring house as part of an extended family. 58-year-old father Ichimi Iwase, 57-year-old mother Masako, their 3 sons, the 3rd son's wife, and their 1-year-old granddaughter named Tomomi. With 6 people remaining in the burning house, the situation became extremely dangerous. The neighbor didn't hesitate, immediately reported the incident, and firefighters quickly arrived at the scene. When the rescue team arrived, they encountered the family's 2nd son, anxiously pacing back and forth in front of the house engulfed in flames. Fortunately, he had escaped because he had to deliver newspapers early in the morning. However, fear was evident on his face, knowing that the 6 remaining family members were still trapped inside the fiercely burning house. The fire started early in the morning, and thankfully, due to the quick response of firefighters, the blaze was extinguished after a few hours. However, the 2nd floor of the house was almost completely burned down. When rescue workers entered, they discovered 5 family members. The father and the 1-year-old granddaughter Tomomi did not survive. Fortunately, Mother Masako, along with the youngest son and his wife, survived, although they were severely injured. If we count 5 people in the house, plus the 2nd son who had gone to deliver newspapers, that makes 6 people in total. So where was the 7th person? Despite careful searching through the rubble, rescue workers could not find the couple's eldest son, 30-year-old Takayuki. The firefighters searched everywhere, hypothesizing that he might be trapped under debris, but there was no sign of Takayuki's whereabouts. Takayuki's mysterious disappearance amid the fire tragedy raised many questions for investigators. Had he left the house before the fire occurred? Or had something else unusual happened on that fateful night? Meanwhile, tragedy had enveloped the Ichimi Iwase family. 2 lives were permanently lost, the father and granddaughter, their bodies charred black in the ashes. However, with keen eyes and extensive experience, investigators quickly discovered something unusual hidden behind this fire. Despite being burned, their bodies still retained deep stab wounds, like silent evidence of a brutal crime. The remaining family members who fortunately escaped death were also in critical condition, unconscious when admitted for emergency care. Doctors determined they would have to undergo an 8-week treatment process due to injuries caused by knife wounds. The truth gradually emerged. This wasn't simply a tragic fire, but a horrific murder disguised behind the flames. Amid the tense atmosphere as the case became increasingly complex, an unexpected development occurred. The youngest son among the surviving victims regained consciousness and, in a weak, broken voice, uttered shocking accusations. Takayuki, he killed my daughter. Takayuki, the eldest son in the family, who had been absent from the scene of the tragedy, was now accused by his youngest brother of committing this terrible crime. Police immediately launched a manhunt for Takayuki, beginning by reviewing all surveillance camera systems in the area. However, in 2010, CCTV systems in Japan were not as widespread as they are today, making the investigation quite challenging. Nevertheless, experienced investigators quickly thought of a potential possibility. Will he appear at his father's funeral? This question arose in the mind of the detective in charge of the case. Many killers, despite intentionally hiding, are often compelled to return to the scene or attend the victim's funeral as a way to witness the consequences of their actions. Police set up a secret surveillance team around the funeral home, waiting patiently. And their prediction came true. Among the crowd of mourners, they detected a suspicious figure moving cautiously around the area. The man wore dark clothing, deliberately keeping his distance and hiding in the shadows to avoid attention. Scouts quickly confirmed it was Takayuki. With seamless coordination, police approached and apprehended the suspect without drawing any attention from funeral attendees. The net had closed, and the main suspect in this horrific murder case had finally been caught. When facing investigators in the interrogation room, Takayuki had to face the key question about his motive. Why did you kill them? In a suffocating moment of silence, Takayuki bowed his head, his lifeless eyes looking at the floor, then muttered in a chillingly indifferent voice, "Father cut off my internet. I was angry, so I killed them all." This answer left the entire interrogation room in a state of shock. A seemingly trivial reason had led to incredibly brutal actions, not just stabbing his entire family, but also setting fire to cover up the crime. Even seasoned investigators struggled to understand this motive. However, the brothers who grew up with Takayuki didn't seem too surprised. They understood that this answer was just the tip of the iceberg, reflecting an unhappy childhood and psychological wounds that had never healed. In their family, the constant conflict between mother and daughter-in-law had created a tense living environment. Takayuki's parents frequently argued, making the family atmosphere always suffocating, lacking the warmth and love a child needs to develop healthily. The situation worsened when Father Ichimi began beating his wife and children whenever he was drunk. Over time, children's painful screams often echoed from that house, but no one seemed to intervene. In this toxic environment, Takayuki gradually withdrew, developing an alarmingly introverted personality. Most notably, throughout his 6 years of elementary school, Takayuki hardly spoke a word. Although he could communicate a little at home, at school he was completely silent, a manifestation of selective mutism due to psychological trauma. Once, he even wet himself because he couldn't bring himself to ask permission to use the bathroom during class. This unfortunate incident quickly made him a target for cruel teasing and bullying from classmates. Takayuki's only joy was lunchtime at school, a precious moment when he could enjoy proper meals. At home, his parents hardly cared about preparing food for him, forcing him to fend for himself with instant noodles. The school lunch trays, though simple, became a rare source of happiness in his gloomy life. Over time, Takayuki found another refuge, the virtual world of video games. This was the only space where he felt safe, not bullied or insulted. When he entered high school, he joined the computer club and began learning programming. Although not particularly talented and often struggling to keep up with his peers, this was the first time he genuinely tried to pursue something. After graduating high school, instead of continuing his education, Takayuki chose to work at a bakery factory. His job was quite simple, just packaging bread, requiring few skills. Nevertheless, he worked diligently and received fairly good evaluations from his superiors. It seemed like Takayuki's life was finally stabilizing. But it was at this point that a bigger problem began to appear in his life. Takayuki did his job well, but because he wasn't good at relationships, he couldn't get along with those around him. This was the second problem. The invisible wall he had built since childhood to protect himself now became a barrier, separating him from colleagues. In particular, he struggled to train new employees, even for simple tasks like packaging bread. His awkwardness and lack of communication skills gradually made him a burden in the company's eyes. While struggling with the work environment, Takayuki also faced increasingly severe depression. Past pain, social isolation, and work pressure had pushed him to the edge. Eventually, he was forced to quit his job at the bakery factory. In a final effort to integrate into society, Takayuki switched to distributing flyers, a job requiring less social interaction. But even this job exceeded his tolerance. Not long after, he quit again, making his life increasingly desperate. From that point on, Takayuki seemed to have completely given up hope of integrating into society. The shock after repeated failures had pushed him into a state of complete withdrawal. He locked himself in his room, creating a separate world. He almost completely cut off communication with his family, always locked his door and ate alone in that isolated space. Occasionally, his father would come knocking, trying to persuade him, "You're an adult now, you need to do something." But these words just passed through the closed door, receiving no response. This silence only widened the gap between him and his family. Rarely, Takayuki would leave his room, but only when his father needed help using the ATM, a device the older man wasn't familiar with. And when this happened repeatedly, the father eventually gave his passbook to his eldest son. This was a dangerous turning point when Takayuki realized, "Father, I can use this passbook," and began withdrawing money without permission. Every month, he would give his father 500,000 won, about $450, and his mother 400,000 won, about $360. But most of the remaining money he used at his discretion like it was his own for endless online shopping. He even boldly made credit cards under his parents' names. With these financial tools in hand, he satisfied all his material desires, gaming consoles, clothes, and countless other items. Each day, unopened parcels piled up outside his room as evidence of his wasteful and irresponsible lifestyle. For the family, this situation was not only annoying but also pushed them to the edge financially. When they realized the severity, the parents had to intervene. "Son, if you continue like this, our family will go bankrupt," they said, and tried to reclaim the cards being misused. Takayuki's reaction was extremely violent. He resisted fiercely, then locked himself in his room again, securing the door like a fortress. Once, in desperation, the father tried to break down the door to reach his son and injured his hand in the process. However, Takayuki showed no intention of yielding. He secretly subscribed to a new internet connection, turning his private space into a world completely separate from the reality outside. When discovering this, the angry father cut off the internet connection, an action that shattered Takayuki's last lifeline to the virtual world. This shock ignited a terrible rage. In extreme anger, he uttered a chilling threat. "If you dare cut my internet, I will kill the entire family and burn down the house." At that moment, everyone just saw this as an angry threat. No one thought these words would actually turn into action. They couldn't imagine that this threat was the final warning before the impending tragedy. 2 days before the tragedy, the situation in the family had become extremely tense. Takayuki, in his anger, had thrown objects at family members and caused such chaos that police had to intervene. However, just after the situation temporarily calmed, he secretly subscribed to a new internet connection, determined not to be cut off from the virtual world, his only refuge. On the fateful night of April 16th, after discovering his son's actions, the father decided to use an extreme measure, using scissors to directly cut the internet cable. For Takayuki, this wasn't simply losing internet connection, but the deprivation of living space, an attack on his very being. The rage within him erupted to an uncontrollable level. At 2 a.m., when the whole house was deep in sleep, Takayuki quietly went down to the kitchen on the first floor, took a sharp kitchen knife, then headed straight to his parents' bedroom. As soon as he opened the door, he shouted a question to which he already knew the answer. "Who cut the internet cable?" Without waiting for a reaction, Takayuki lunged straight at his father, swinging the knife frantically. The continuous cruel knife blows took the father's life in an instant. He died on the spot due to excessive blood loss. But Takayuki's rage didn't stop there. After ending his father's life, he immediately turned to attack his mother sleeping nearby. Then, like a wounded animal blindly seeking revenge, he rushed into other rooms, directing the knife toward the youngest brother's family, the brother, his wife, and their young child. It all happened in just about 10 brief but horrifying minutes. During that time, Takayuki stabbed family members more than 40 times, an uncontrollable burst of violence. Amid that bloody chaos, the youngest brother's 1-year-old daughter, innocent little Tomomi, did not survive the fatal wounds. Before fleeing, Takayuki made a decision to return to his room, using a lighter to set fire to his blanket. After watching the flames gradually spread to the second floor, he left the burning house. When he got outside, Takayuki noticed his clothes were covered in bloodstains. Without hesitation, he turned them inside out to wear, concealing the suspicious bloodstains. This action showed that even in his frenzy, he was still lucid enough to calculate, to cover up the crime he had committed. However, his escape did not last long, and finally, Takayuki was caught thanks to decisive testimony from surviving relatives and the police's clever surveillance strategy at the funeral home. The story took an unexpected turn in November 2011, when the first trial opened at the Nagoya court. Before the trial, Takayuki had been required to undergo psychiatric evaluation, and the results illuminated many things the family had never known. He suffered from intellectual disability and autism. This information put the entire story in a completely different context. Suddenly, people understood why Takayuki couldn't integrate into the school environment during childhood, why he didn't speak for long periods, and the reasons behind the difficulties he had experienced throughout his life. If his parents had realized earlier that their son had intellectual and developmental issues, perhaps they could have treated him differently, sought professional help, and possibly prevented the tragedy from occurring. However, it must be emphasized that understanding Takayuki's psychological context and disabilities does not equate to excusing or forgiving the brutal murders he committed. Regardless of circumstances, taking the lives of others, especially one's own family members, remains an inexcusable crime. The discovery of Takayuki's intellectual disability and autism turned the trial into a heated debate about mental capacity and legal responsibility. Takayuki's defense lawyer, while not denying his client's murders and assaults, argued that he initially had no intention to kill. They emphasized that due to intellectual disability and autism, Takayuki's ability to control his behavior was severely diminished, a factor the court should consider when rendering a verdict. In contrast, the prosecutors strongly rebutted, asserting that after 4 months of detention and careful monitoring, they had determined Takayuki was fully capable of understanding and being responsible for his actions. At this crucial moment, the youngest brother and his wife, who had lost both their daughter and father, came forward to testify to the court. Their testimony was emotional and skeptical. "We've lived with our older brother all our lives, but never knew about his intellectual disability and autism." They questioned with disbelief. He could even register credit cards himself. How could he have an intellectual disability? From an objective perspective, it's understandable why the family didn't recognize Takayuki's condition. The boundaries of intellectual disability today are often not clear, especially in mild cases. Many people with mild intellectual disabilities or high-functioning autism can still perform daily activities, even complex operations like registering credit cards. In any case, having lost their baby daughter, it's hard to blame the youngest brother and his wife for not providing testimony favorable to Takayuki. The pain of losing a child had made them unable to view the situation objectively. Throughout the trial, they firmly demanded the death penalty for the older brother. The emotional distance and indignation were clearly expressed through how they addressed him, no longer calling Takayuki brother, but only the defendant, or the perpetrator. More notably, even the defendant's mother testified with full anger and fear. "I am too afraid and cannot live with him. He killed my husband and killed my granddaughter." She also demanded her son receive the death penalty. Although this testimony pained many, it could be understood from the broken heart of a wife who had just lost her husband and a grandmother who had lost her grandchild. However, an unexpected development occurred when the mother decided to visit Takayuki at his detention center. During this meeting, the son burst into tears and sincerely apologized. That moment completely changed the mother's perspective. She returned to court with a shocking statement. "My son has sincerely apologized and I have forgiven him, so isn't 2 to 3 years in prison enough?" This question caused a strong reaction. "No, ma'am, 2 to 3 years in prison is completely disproportionate to the crimes committed." Nevertheless, in December of the same year, the court concluded, Takayuki had the intention to kill and he had sufficient mental capacity to bear legal responsibility. How did they assess this? When Takayuki took the knife and sought the person who cut his internet, his father tried to escape, but he prevented him and stabbed precisely at vital points. This was very important. Additionally, based on the content of his confession, he fully understood the meaning of the act of killing. Finally, the court sentenced him to 30 years in prison. In his final statement, Takayuki repeatedly apologized to his family and expressed his wish to turn back time if possible. However, contrary to what he said, he was not ready to accept 30 years in prison and appealed, arguing that the sentence was too harsh. In 2012, his appeals were rejected, and the 30-year sentence was finally confirmed. In the end, throughout the period after committing the horrific crime, it was said that Takayuki only cried twice. The first time was when his mother, who had publicly demanded her son face the death penalty, visited him at the detention center. The second time was when he received a letter from his mother with the content, "Mother forgives you." This made many people wonder if he truly felt remorse for what he had done to other family members, or if his repentance was limited to his relationship with his mother. Looking back at the entire story and Takayuki's turbulent childhood, it's hard not to feel some empathy. The family's failure to recognize his intellectual disability and autism had inadvertently pushed him into isolation, cutting him off from school and society. Without professional support, without being understood and accepted, Takayuki turned to the internet world as his only refuge, where he wasn't judged, didn't have to feel inadequate. For Takayuki, the internet wasn't just a means of entertainment, but his entire world, perhaps more important than family. That's why when he said he killed because his internet was cut off, it initially sounded absurd and incomprehensible, but seen in the context of his life, one can understand somewhat that motive. For someone who had lost all real connections with the world, losing the only virtual connection might have been the last straw, pushing him into the abyss of violence and crime. The next case also occurred in Japan. On January 26, 2018, a patient in critical condition was brought to the emergency room of a hospital in Sakai City, Osaka, Japan. The 67-year-old man named Tomio Adachi was unconscious when admitted. His health was already extremely weak, a diabetic patient with stage 4 colon cancer who had undergone surgery to remove part of his colon. The situation became more serious as the cancer had metastasized to his lungs and liver, forcing him to go through a difficult radiation therapy process. Mr. Tomio was someone who needed special medical care. However, the cause of his unconsciousness this time was not due to cancer. Just 6 days earlier, on January 20th, 2018, he had been hospitalized for a fainting spell due to hypoglycemia. After a few days of treatment, his condition had stabilized, and he was discharged on the 25th, just 1 day before being readmitted in emergency condition. This time, Mr. Tomio's hypoglycemic condition had become extremely serious. His blood sugar level was only 20 milligrams per deciliter, a red alert level compared to the normal range of 70 to 110 milligrams per deciliter. Doctors knew that when blood sugar drops below 30 milligrams per deciliter, the risk of death is very high. Tomio was truly at the boundary between life and death. The medical team immediately implemented emergency measures, fighting every second to save his fragile life. But the tragedy didn't stop there. Just 1 day later, on March 27th, Tomio's eldest son, 40-year-old Masamitsu Adachi, was found collapsed in the bathroom at his father's house. At that time, the eldest son, mother, and older sister Akimi were in the house. Masamitsu had gone to the bathroom but didn't come out for a long time. Worried about the prolonged silence, the family decided to check on him. When they opened the door and went in, a heartbreaking scene appeared. Masamitsu had collapsed, motionless. Sister Akemi immediately notified Masamitsu's wife, who was away. The wife rushed over, only to witness the painful image of her husband leaning against the bathroom wall unconscious. Masamitsu was taken to the hospital immediately, but all rescue efforts were in vain. Finally, doctors had to declare that he had passed away. The cause of death was determined to be carbon monoxide poisoning. When checking the scene in the bathroom, they found a charcoal brazier burning on the closed toilet lid, a common method of suicide by gas asphyxiation. The situation seemed clearly to be a suicide. Police quickly concluded that Masamitsu had burned charcoal in the enclosed space to end his life. This judgment was further reinforced by the appearance of a suicide note. Right after Masamitsu was discovered in the bathroom, Akimi, the sister, handed his wife a letter with the explanation, "This seems to be a suicide note." The content of the letter revealed a horrifying truth. "I tried going everywhere to borrow money for my father and sister, but I failed. The truth is, I injected insulin into my father. My father's unconsciousness is my fault." This information placed the event in a completely new context. As known, Tomio, who was hospitalized, was a diabetic patient. People with diabetes typically have high blood sugar and need regular insulin injections to control this condition. Insulin works to lower blood sugar levels. However, if injected at too high a dose, insulin can cause severe hypoglycemia, even life-threatening, exactly the condition Tomio was facing. The suicide note indirectly admitted that Masamitsu was the one who intentionally overdosed his father with insulin, leading to the dangerous hypoglycemic condition. Feelings of guilt and financial pressure seemed to have pushed the son to decide to end his own life. Surprisingly, the Adachi family did not live in poverty as one might imagine. On the contrary, they had been a fairly well-off family. Tomio, the father currently in the hospital, until recently had run a sizable water pipeline construction company in Sakai City, Osaka. This company specialized in water equipment and pipeline works for buildings, a field with consistent demand. With solid expertise, Tomio's business had thrived for many years, until a few years ago, when Tomio's health began to deteriorate seriously due to diabetes and colon cancer. He decided to hand over the business to his children. The family had 2 children, the eldest daughter Akemi, 44 years old, and son Masamitsu, 40 years old. However, things became more complicated when it was known that Masamitsu had not taken over the family company. Instead, he had established and ran his own construction company, and in fact, it was quite successful. Therefore, Akemi, the sister, naturally took over running their father's company. She officially began this role in 2015, 3 years before the current time. Unfortunately, under Akemi's management, the family company quickly fell into crisis. Within just 2 years, revenue had dropped by half, and the financial situation became increasingly serious. When he learned of this situation, Masamitsu couldn't stand by and watch. With deep affection, he told himself, "This is the family business that father built. We cannot let it fail." Determined to save his father's legacy, Masamitsu ran around borrowing money everywhere, hoping to help his father and sister overcome difficulties. This somewhat explains the first line in his suicide note, about trying to borrow money but failing. However, in this process, the conflict between the siblings increased. Why? Because now Masamitsu understood the company's situation clearly. From the brother's perspective, he might think, "Sister, why are you running the company so poorly? Why are you so incompetent?" Conversely, the sister might feel, "Although you say you're helping us, aren't you hurting my pride?" This started the conflict, and as time passed, it became more intense, to the point where there were days they said harsh words like, "I have to kill you to feel comfortable." The sibling relationship had become irreparably fractured, although it all started with the desire to save their father's company. Meanwhile, Masamitsu's wife was well aware of the family situation. Her husband often told her, "Darling, you need to be careful with my sister. She's too greedy and incapable of running the company." They had discussed this as a couple. But looking back, the deceased husband's suicide note had something strange. This was the letter that the sister had given her during that emergency, but it was printed from a computer-generated document, not handwritten. The wife thought, "Did my husband ever write letters using a computer?" No, never. Moreover, when examining the letter, the grammar and word choices were completely different from her husband's usual writing style. The wife immediately suspected the sister and reported this to the police. "Officer, I think my sister-in-law is involved in my husband's death. Please investigate." So, although initially the case was considered a simple suicide, after hearing information from the wife, the police agreed to investigate deeper. As a result, the initial investigation had missed many suspicious points in this case. First, at the scene where Masamitsu was found dead, there was tape on the bathroom door. Normally, this could be understood as a measure to ensure no one could open the door from outside and interfere with his actions. However, there was a strange detail. The roll of tape used was found in the storage room, not inside the bathroom. If Masamitsu really was the one who taped the door, why was the tape roll outside, while it should have been brought in and still inside the bathroom? Another unusual point was that the burning charcoal brazier was placed on the toilet lid, but no lighter or any fire-starting tools were found inside the bathroom. If Masamitsu really lit the charcoal himself, what did he use to light it? And why not leave that tool in the bathroom? This made no sense at all. Next, in an effort to verify the authenticity of the suicide note, police thoroughly examined all computers at Masamitsu's home and office. The purpose was to find where he had drafted and stored the letter. However, after careful investigation, they found no letter file anywhere. This was very suspicious. If Masamitsu really wrote this letter, there must be some trace in his electronic devices. So they expanded the search scope. Do you know where the letter file was found? It was on the computer at the house where he died. They also confirmed it had been printed from the printer there. Now, the arrow of suspicion naturally pointed toward the sister, Akemi. When police forensically examined her mobile phone, they discovered she had searched for information related to charcoal multiple times. And most importantly, when conducting Masamitsu's autopsy, forensic experts discovered an extremely shocking detail. There were traces of sleeping pills in his body. This was surprising because according to information from relatives and friends, Masamitsu was not someone who regularly used sleeping pills. Even more suspicious, the sleeping pill component found in his body matched exactly the type of medication that Akemi, the sister, had been prescribed earlier. The investigative net gradually tightened around Akemi. Perhaps sensing the increasing pressure one day, Akemi proactively came to see the police. However, instead of admitting or explaining, she made a surprising statement. "I think my brother's wife is suspicious. She should be investigated." Clearly, Akemi was trying to blame her sister-in-law, suggesting that the wife had killed her own husband and was conspiring to blame her. Her next action was even worse. Akemi had created flyers about this conspiracy theory herself. She distributed them to neighbors, tucked them under windshield wipers, and tried to spread the message. "I am not the killer. Masamitsu's wife might be the killer." When she couldn't control her anger, she even vandalized her sister-in-law's car with red spray paint, maliciously harassing her. All these actions were captured on surveillance cameras. In fact, the more extreme her actions became, the more suspicious Akemi became. Finally, on June 20th, 2018, Akemi was arrested for killing her brother. However, this case had another witness. Masamitsu's mother recounted, "That day, my daughter, Akemi, made me a cup of green tea. But right after drinking it, I felt dizzy and fell asleep. When I woke up, my son was dead." The mother had fallen asleep at that time. Based on this, police determined that on the day of the incident, the sister had used a similar method to render her brother unconscious. She then moved him into the bathroom, lit the charcoal, taped the door, and somehow left the scene, staging a suicide. It's horrifying to think that a sister would kill her own brother right in the house where her parents lived. So what was the motive for murder presented before the trial? According to Masamitsu's wife's testimony, the day before the incident, when the father was hospitalized with severe hypoglycemia, Masamitsu had confided to his wife a frightening suspicion. "I think this is because of my sister." This comment may have become a death sentence for him. If Masamitsu had begun to suspect and might find evidence about his sister's behavior, Akemi perhaps feared that her brother knew the truth and could expose her crime. This was reinforced by the suicide note that was now clearly forged by Akemi herself. In the letter, she cleverly transferred guilt to her deceased brother with the content, "I injected insulin into my father." The tragedy of the Adachi family didn't stop there. Just 8 days after Akemi was arrested on charges of killing her brother, the father, Mr. Tomio, also passed away. By this point, 2 family members had departed. Police expanded their investigation to determine whether Akemi was behind both deaths. Once again, they discovered many suspicious situations related to the father's death. Both times the father was hospitalized. Coincidentally, Akemi was at home from the previous evening. Moreover, what was especially cruel was that when the father was experiencing hypoglycemia and complained that he felt dizzy and unwell, Akemi took no action. She simply left her father in that condition for a long time. Only when he finally lost consciousness and collapsed did she call emergency services. I'll call 911. Additionally, when forensically examining her mobile phone during this time, they found searches like insulin overdose. Can prolonged hypoglycemia cause death? How did she have time to search for these things when her father had collapsed? Based on these circumstances and evidence, in October 2018, Akemi was also charged with killing her father, Tomio. Was Akemi a deranged woman from the beginning? The story of her past reveals a complex and surprising journey. Born in 1974, Akemi's adolescence was the image of someone admired by all. She was known as a beautiful girl, academically gifted, athletically talented, and with a likable personality, particularly noticed and liked by male friends. Akemi appeared to have a brilliant future waiting ahead. After graduating from university smoothly, her life continued with a happy turning point when she met and married a postal worker 10 years her senior. This marriage produced 2 sons. On the surface, everything seemed perfect for a fulfilling family life. However, happiness didn't last. The marriage began to have problems when her husband fell into gambling, leading to financial difficulties and increasing family tensions. Faced with this situation, Akemi decided to divorce. But it was at this point that a worrying dark side in Akemi's character began to emerge. Determined to gain custody of her children at any cost, she took an extreme and illegal action, secretly placing marijuana in her husband's wallet, deliberately staging drug use allegations to tarnish her husband before the court. This conspiracy was eventually exposed, and shockingly, it was Akemi herself who was arrested for her illegal behavior. The aftermath of this incident pushed Akemi's life into a dark period. She lost her job and went through difficult months until a new opportunity appeared. Her father became ill and decided to hand over the family company for her to manage. After her divorce, Akemi had a brief relationship with a man. According to this man, Akemi was someone with high self-esteem. She also tended to avoid the reality she was facing. She wasn't someone who only pursued money. In fact, even after taking over her father's company, she complained that it didn't suit her and caused great pressure. Her boyfriend at the time had suggested, "If so, why not quit?" Akemi had answered, "I don't know, I'll just keep working as long as I can. I just want to work part-time and live." She showed avoidance rather than seeking positive solutions, but this was the family company. In August 2022, Akemi's trial began. However, throughout the trial, she only said one sentence: "I have nothing special to say." The defense team, of course, advocated for her innocence. They emphasized that there was no decisive motive for her to kill her father and brother. Moreover, they argued that it was impossible for a sister to move her sleeping brother into the bathroom by herself and stage a suicide. Regarding the evidence of searching, can hypoglycemia cause death? On her mobile phone, they explained it was only due to concern for her father in an emergency situation. In the trial, the cause of Tomio's death also became an issue. Tomio's primary doctor believed it was due to hypoglycemic shock from insulin overdose. If it could be proven that Akemi had injected insulin, then this would be murder. On the other hand, Tomio also had colon cancer, and the oncologist had concluded that the deterioration was due to cancer. If the cause of death was cancer, Tomio would be considered to have died from illness, and Akemi might escape the murder charge. Meanwhile, Akemi's mother struggled to testify. "I think whenever my daughter visited our home, my husband would experience hypoglycemia. That seems to be true." This must have been a heartbreaking situation for the mother, as now both her husband and son were dead, and her daughter was charged with murder. Perhaps she wanted to save her daughter, but she courageously provided this testimony. In the second trial, prosecutors presented new evidence related to money. After her father was hospitalized, within a short period, Akemi had continuously withdrawn money from the bank account. This increased the possibility that the motive for killing her father was financial, and this was important evidence for the verdict. In November 2022, the final judgment day arrived. The Osaka court found Akemi Adachi guilty of murdering her brother and father. The judge declared that she had taken the lives of her closest relatives through a meticulous plan, and Akemi was sentenced to life imprisonment. In fact, prosecutors had requested the death penalty, but the reason for the life sentence was that the motive for murder was still weak and the brutality of the crime was not high. After the verdict, both Akemi and the prosecutors appealed. The appeal trial took place in January 2024. During the trial, Akemi still insisted on her innocence, while prosecutors continued to request the death penalty, arguing that life imprisonment was insufficient. By April 2024, the appeal results were announced. The court upheld the lower court's verdict, rejected the appeal, and confirmed the life sentence for Akemi. These two horrific cases in Japan, the Ichimi Iwase family massacre by Takayuki and the Adachi family murders by Akemi, though different in circumstances, both expose dark corners in society. Both cases sound the alarm about social issues that silently exist. The isolation of young people, economic pressure, deficiencies in the mental health support system, and the breakdown of the traditional Japanese family structure. They also show the importance of early recognition of abnormal signs in behavior and psychology, especially in the family environment. What do you think about these two cases? Please share in the comments below. Thank you for watching and see you in the next videos.